Welcome to our YouTube channel. In this video we will talk about top 5 worst punishments in the whole history of mankind. Subscribe to the Storm Factory channel, and don't forget to like the video, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss out on any new videos like this. History is littered with some truly horrifying examples of punishments, that are twisted in their creativity, and show that the human ability to inflict suffering upon others is truly unlimited. Here are the 5 worst punishments of all time. Number 5. The Brazen Bull. Also known as the Bronze Bull or Sicilian Bull, this gruesome contraption was designed in ancient Greece as a punishment and execution device. It was made entirely from bronze, and was crafted into the shape and size of a real-life bull. It was hollowed out inside, and contained a door on its side, that was big enough to fit a man through. A condemned criminal, or simply anyone whom its owner wanted to punish, would be placed inside the bull, with the door shut behind him. A roaring fire would be set beneath the bronze bull, effectively turning it into a scorching hot oven, slowly roasting the poor individual trapped inside. Incense would be placed inside to mask the stench of burning flesh, and in a sickening twist, its creator installed a series of tubes and acoustic pipes into the head of the bull which were designed to convert the howling screams of the man roasting inside into something similar to the bellowing of an angry bull. The disturbing device was said to have been created by Perilos of Athens, who traveled to Sicily in an attempt to win favor with Phalaris, the ruler of the city of Acragas, who was believed to be a cruel tyrant. Thinking that such a man might be impressed by his creation, Perilos was confident that he would profit from the trip. However, even this cruel dictator was disgusted by the contraption. He asked Perilos to crawl inside and demonstrate the sound to him, so as to prove that his invention worked. Perilos agreed. However, upon entering the bull, the door was shut behind him, and a fire was set. The tyrant yelled to the terrified Perilos locked inside, "Let the music master be the first to play." Number 4. The rat torture. Rats have a long history of being used to inflict pain and suffering upon torture victims. During the 1500s, the Tower of London was known to contain a cell which had earned the name Dungeon of the Rats. Prisoners would be placed in a cell which was located below the high water mark of the River Thames, and engulfed in darkness. As the tide began to flow in, the hordes of rats which populate the banks of the river would rush into the cell, tormenting its unfortunate occupants. Sleeping under such conditions would be risky, as the rats would often tear flesh from the legs and arms of those attempting to rest on the cold floor of the cell. However, the worst example of the rat torture is one that has become infamous in fiction and television, but is based upon reality. Rats are well known for their ability to chew through most things, and their sharp teeth can exert 24,000 pounds of pressure per square inch, enabling to bite through wood, brick, and even metal. This impressive ability was put to use in a cheap and extremely effective torture method. A rat would be placed on the victim's exposed stomach, and covered with a bucket or container. The bucket would then be heated, and as it got hotter and hotter, the rat trapped inside would begin to panic and seek out an escape route. Faced with flesh on one side, or hot metal on the other, that rat would choose the path of least resistance, and began biting it through the victim's skin and into their flesh in a desperate bid to escape. Number 3. Keel howling. For much of history, life aboard a naval ship was a brutal and harsh existence. The captain of the ship was the king of his vessel, and many of the sailors toiling on board were not there willingly. Kidnapping and forced impressment into the navy were common, and punishments had to be severe to keep the men disciplined and working hard. Isolated in the middle of the ocean, the captain and his officers were vastly outnumbered. Mutiny was a very real danger, and discipline was enforced ruthlessly in an effort to keep order. The captain's word was law, and he held the power of life and death over his crew. Any man who broke one of the countless number of rules and regulations was liable to be punished in the most brutal fashion. Perhaps the most feared of these punishments was the practice of keel howling. The victim would be stripped naked, have his legs weighted, and then be suspended from a rope that ran under the bottom of the ship and up the other side. At the sound of a cannon shot, he would be dropped into the water and dragged under the ship, across the hull, and over the keel before finally being pulled up on the other side of the ship. Drowning was not the only danger the man being keel-hauled had to contend with, however. The ship's hull would likely be covered in razor-sharp barnacles, and his naked body would have been dragged at great speed across the jagged hull to reduce the risk of drowning. This would result in his skin being lacerated and shredded, chunks of flesh being carved off, and in some cases limbs were lost. There are even accounts of men being decapitated during the ordeal. If the man survived the punishment, he would still have to contend with infections to the many deep cuts that now covered his body, and often the punishment would be repeated several times. The man's terrible scars would serve as a permanent reminder to him and other crew members of the consequences of breaking the rules and disobeying the word of the captain. Number 2. The Blood Eagle. Vikings have long been portrayed as powerful warriors and intrepid explorers who treated their enemies with savage cruelty. However, the Blood Eagle stands out in history as being one of the more shocking and disturbing practices used by the Norse. According to some sources, the Blood Eagle was a ritual killing in which the victim would first be tied up and held face down, before having the pattern of an eagle with its wings stretched out in flight carved upon his back with a blade. The back would then be cut open, exposing the back of the ribcage, and one by one the ribs would be snapped free from the spine, and pulled outwards so that they point away from the body, creating the appearance of a bloody and grisly pair of eagle's wings. Some sources even say that salt would be rubbed into the horrific wound to increase the amount of pain experienced, and as a gruesome finale, the lungs would be pulled from the exposed chest cavity and draped over the dying man's horrific bone wings, while he slowly suffocated and bled to death. According to the sagas, this terrifying punishment was reserved for noblemen, and was a very rare occurrence, and there seem to be only 2 instances mentioned in Norse writings. The Orkneyinga saga, which is 12th century Icelandic account of the Earls of Orkney, speaks of a blood eagle being carved into the back of a Viking earl by his rival, which is described in the saga as being a sacrifice to Odin, in which the eagle was carved with a sword, before the ribs were cut from the backbone, and the lungs drawn out and given to Odin in thanks for victory. Number 1. The boat scaphism. The boats may not sound like a very intimidating name for a punishment, however what it entails is truly horrifying. It was a favorite method of punishment in ancient Persia, and was designed to inflict the most amount of suffering possible, and extend the victim's misery for as long as possible. In ancient times, death alone was not seen as a sufficient punishment for severe crimes. In fact, a quick death was viewed as merciful. Because of this, it seems that those in power at the time dedicated an inhuman amount of time and creativity into dreaming up the worst ways to punish their enemies. The victim would be stripped naked, and his body enclosed within 2 small boats designed to fit precisely together, with just his head, hands and feet sticking out through holes. The boats would be nailed together, trapping the victim inside, who would then be force-fed milk and honey, as well as having the sticky mixture smeared over his face, feet and hands. He would then be floated out into the middle of a still lake, or simply left out in the sun. The sweet mixture would quickly attract swarms of flies and insects, which would cover the defenseless man's exposed skin, stinging and biting him, causing constant agony. The honey mixture would also keep him alive and nourished, prolonging his torture and his excrement. And urine would slowly build up inside the boats, slowly filling them, which would attract even more flies and insects. Over time, the constant swarms of insects would begin, feeding on the victim whilst he was still alive, and flies would begin laying their eggs inside the boats, and even inside his flesh, which was now turning putrefied. The victim would be fed the milk and honey each day and have a fresh coat applied to his skin, and should he refuse to eat any more, his eyes would be pricked with a knife until he became more cooperative. In this way he was kept alive for the maximum amount of time possible, until he finally succumbed to his injuries, sometimes after as much as 2 weeks of suffering, usually dying due to a combination of dehydration, septic shock, exposure, and infections caused by the wounds inflicted by all manner of insects burrowing into his flesh. What do you think of our list? Let me know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from me again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.